Since the fall federal election, a lot of questions are hanging over the Conservative Party, like what went wrong in the campaign and who should replace Andrew Scheer as leader. Does the party need to consider some different policies? Well, both party faithful and non-conservatives have weighed in through a new poll. Shachi Kurl is executive director of the Angus Reid Institute, and she joins us from Vancouver. Hi, Shachi.
Hey, Vashi.
Great to see you again. Let's talk a little bit about this poll and specifically the big headline that emerged from it, and that is who is the top pick among party faithful?
Well, not just among party faithful, but among those who might also consider voting for the party, because there's been a big discussion about who might grow the tent. So two different subsets, two different sets of respondents, but regardless among who you're asking, it is Rona Ambrose who really emerges as the person who can bring the core of the party together as being their top pick, and also is someone that soft voters, possible voters, might also consider. And of course, there has been so much hand-wringing since October 21st among Conservatives and really observation among the general public around what could the Conservatives have done to make themselves more politically palatable. Look, there are a number of people who, more centrist voters might have supported. Rona Ambrose, of course, we've talked about. There's also people like Peter MacKay. People have talked about Lisa Wright. They've talked about Erin O'Toole. In the West, they talk about Brad Wall. But really the key is who are the candidates who can not just bring those would-be voters into the big blue tent, but actually keep that blue tent together among the core grassroots. And it is Rona who emerges as a most appealing leader among both those groups.
Speaking of sort of the direction that the party takes going forward, you also surveyed feelings on policy positions of the party and what needs to happen with that moving forward. What did you find out?
Well, listen, what we found was that, again, even core Conservatives do recognize that the party on social values, they say, needs to move more to the center, needs to get a little more centrist, a little bit more moderate. Issues such as having something to say on climate change, not necessarily, raising the issue of gay pride or having another conversation on same-sex marriage or having conversations on abortion, are issues that, again, not just would-be or soft voters are saying, yeah, the party needs to go in that direction, but also true blue Conservative voters are saying this. And that did stand out to me because I think one of the outstanding or the unknown issues in the hours and days after Andrew Scheer's resignation was going to be, where does the party go from here? And is the party united in having to decide on a direction, especially on a change in direction? And there was some speculation that the hardcore of the party might say, that the most loyal wing might say, well, no, look, actually, we like where we were. And if nobody else likes us, that's fine. But you know what, Vashi? The impetus, the urge to win and not lose and not be on the outside looking in is a pretty strong one. And what you're seeing right here is Conservative voters and would-be Conservative voters having some sense of agreement and consensus that the party does need to move more towards the center.
And what about the alignment between what you just described and then the first answer you gave on the people who are polling near the top of that list? Rona Ambrose, Peter MacKay, Caroline Mulroney, Michelle Rempel, Lisa Wright, Pierre Poilievre. What is the alignment like between that concept of values and what they want to espouse going forward and who they want to lead that charge?
Well, some of that has to do with what these people might say themselves around policy. And a lot of it, Vashi, has to do actually with regional acceptability. So someone like Peter MacKay, interestingly, who might look pretty good to a would-be Conservative voter in Ontario East, is maybe not as exciting in places like Alberta and Saskatchewan. On the other hand, someone like Rona Ambrose looks to be doing fairly well across the board. Now, we know that there are certain progressives in that field. We know there are people who are more hardcore big C Conservative in that field, but there's a lot of names. There's a lot of people who are just saying we're not that interested until hint, hint, nudge, nudge. They maybe look at some polling numbers and decide maybe they are interested. Of course, it's always a safe thing to say that they're going to hedge for the time being, take Christmas, talk to their families. But ultimately, I think what the party is indicating And these are very early days. We should acknowledge that.
Very true.
But in these early days, I think what we are hearing again from Conservative voters who will vote Conservative no matter who is leading the party, and those who really said, no thank you, Andrew Scheer. If you had been a different candidate, we might have considered the party. Those two forces are coming together to say we need to hear something a little more centrist. We need to hear something a little bit more moderate. Ambrose is perceived to fit that bill. McKay perceived to fit that bill. But again, it will come down to which of these people on that long list can also build coalitions, not just in places where they are strong regionally, but across the country. So you have to look at, how does a Caroline Mulroney do in Quebec versus a leader or a would-be leader who maybe isn't as bilingual like Brad Wall. These are going to be regional considerations to keep in mind as well.
Lots to think about and for us to talk about in the coming weeks and months. Thanks, Shachi.
Thanks, Vashi.
Shachi Curl of the Angus Reid Institute. Welcome back to Power and Politics with the Power Panel. Kathleen Petty, Tiffany Gooch, Jeff Norquay, and Françoise Boivin. The political rumor mill is going full speed on who might run to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. You can now add Rona Ambrose to the list of those not ruling it out. As we discussed a bit earlier with Shachi Curl of the Angus Reid Institute, there's already some positive polling about Ambrose as head of the Tories. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney and former Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall both pointed to her as their preference in various interviews. So will she go for it? Jeff. Will she? Should she? Is she the next leader of the party from your perspective?
My personal hope is yes. But seriously, where we are right now, I think, is a bit of a phony war. The leadership is open. People are spending a lot of time talking to each other. They're putting together teams. They're scoping out the possibilities of who's going to run. And in a sense, I think everybody is waiting for Rona Ambrose because I think she is the putative odds-on favorite to get the job if she runs. So I think until she makes that decision, there's going to be a lot of quiet, but it's like the duck with lots going on below the surface, but nothing much to show to it.
That's very true. Tiffany, what do you think?
So I mean, these things can turn very quickly and in lots of different directions, as we've seen. I think definitely thinking about what the length of this race is going to be, whether or not they'll be able to get things organized enough to have the decision take place in April, and that plays a really big role in who would enter, who would be able to pull together a campaign fast enough to get in. Of course, Rona obviously has a great grouping of support within the party, but the longer it extends, the more sort of wild card candidates, I think will likely also have to expect. $100,000 isn't that much of a threshold to enter a race for some people, and 300 signatures, depending on what the criteria ends up being. And so there's always this possibility that this gets hijacked in a way that I think the core membership would likely prefer not to see. So how quickly this can be arranged, how quickly Rona can also make the decision among her family, but obviously a very big decision to make, but also have to consider all of those that are deciding right now, deciding if they could see themselves or throwing their support behind others, or also looking at their own long-term possibilities. I'm sure for some of these premiers that are putting their support behind her are also thinking too about their long-term leadership projections. And so lots to consider and lots to watch for the next few months.
Yeah, Françoise, they both, Jason Kenney, Premier Jason Kenney and former Premier Brad Wall, were saying that in response basically to speculation that they themselves might run, and they both pointed to her. What does that tell us, do you think?
Well, first it tells us that they don't want to run and they have a preferred candidate.
Thank you for reading between the lines.
Yeah, I just love those polls at first where they just put names of people that are basically known or we might have heard here and there or read somewhere on social media. I mean, when you put Poilievre and Rampol and company, and you know what the Conservatives need right now, they don't need another Andrew Scheer. They don't need a battle where it's going to go for 13 rounds before they name somebody. So you're trying to look to the obvious. And of course, Rona Ambrose, who's was a great politician, although some people might argue, and believe you me, the minute she announced is the day she becomes less popular, because all the adversaries are going to, I'm sure they're quick right now doing research. I mean, I was reviewing when I was in Women Critic, her portfolio, and she voted in favor of the motion 312, which was presented by Woodworth, a bit to reopen abortion, one of those abortion files, and she voted with people against abortion. So it's like she'll have answers to, and I'm just thinking, that's not the path she gave herself. So, of course, it's flattering when people come to you and say, hey, we see you as the leader. But my advice to her, if I have any advice, but I haven't done and participated in a lot, not as a candidate, but in a lot of leadership race with my time as a Liberal, it can be deadly. Think seriously, because she's a bit like the Bob Rae of the Conservative, that Bob Rae was for the Liberals. He was interim, a great interim leader, didn't present himself after Ignatieff stepped down. Trudeau arrived, won the, so is it good for her? I'm not so sure. And the only thing I would say to her, wait, the minute you announce is the day that you're not that popular.
Kathleen?
Well, look, she knows what she's getting into if she decides to get into it first. Secondly, any positions that may have evolved for her over time, I would argue that most people think that she's quite capable of articulating that evolution of thinking, which was
better than
one
Andrew.
of the exactly.
Sure.
That's exactly my point. The other thing I would say is I think there are a lot of people maybe also considering getting into the race, basing that decision on what Rona Ambrose decides, which really tells you something.
Yep.
And I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect Peter MacKay might be one of them. So as the people who may end up running against Rona Ambrose are people who have no hope of winning anyway, like you end up sort of with the lesser. And I would also say what the Conservatives probably need is someone they don't have to introduce to Canadians. Yep. That was a big part of the problem with Andrew Scheer. Other people defined him. They're going to want a leader that is defined already. And you know, we do make the mistake when we're in Ottawa, and I did work there for a while. We have this tendency to think people know people really well, but actually they have no clue who they are.
No.
And that was a big part, Jeff, of even for Jagmeet Singh and Andrew Scheer during the campaign, right?
Yeah.
And you saw once they did get to know them, how the favorability ratings changed in opposite directions. For those two.
And coming out of the recent election campaign, we need to remember that there is two sides to leadership. There's the messenger side, which everybody is possessed about now because of the experience with Mr. Scheer. But there is also the message side. And as Shachi Curl pointed out in the Angus Reid research today, Canadians of all shapes and sizes are saying you've got to get into the 21st century on two issues, on climate change and the social values issues. And I think that content of the policy direction of the party is going to be as important in this race as the messenger.
Wasn't she Minister of Environment?
She was Minister of Environment in Tundra Harbour, Minister of Health as well. So there will be a lot of tough questions. I've got about 30 seconds left. Last word to you, Tiffany.
I guess I would just say that leadership races become a really difficult time for a party to control its own message. So another area that they'll need to pay attention to are the fringe candidates, the folks that are trying to build a lot of support on really polarizing issues and the ways within which they'll continue to have a moderate perception among Canadians while that's taking place.
Very good point. All right, I'll leave it there. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our power panel this evening, Kathleen Putty, Tiffany Gooch, Jeff Norquay, and Françoise Boivin. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.